Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you've already mastered dovetails and you want to take your work to the next level, try a mitered through dovetail joint. It's a great way to dress up a piece of casework. Stay with me. I'm going to walk you through it. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help you take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, be sure to subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and don't forget to turn on the notification on your mobile device so you'll know every time we release a new video. Good? All right, back to the bench. Okay, so let me explain this a little bit more. Here's just a little single drawer, and what I've done is I put a miter on right here. It cleans it up a little bit as opposed to having a traditional butt joint that you would have with a through dovetail. Now, what's it require? Well, obviously you have to know how to do dovetails. So there's your traditional through dovetail. And then there's an example of a mitered edge dovetail. Looks very similar, except you're not going to see the end of a pin right here. Instead, you're going to have that miter. Now, if you think this is a result of 40 plus years of experience, I want to show you a couple of samples. Phil was in my class last week. It was a 1 week class. This is his first dovetail that he did. You check that out. And then there's a half blind that he did. So it doesn't take a long time to develop the ability to do this if you have the right tools and some good instruction. Now, why would you do this? Here's another reason. So we've got a bead on this piece of wood. If you tried to do a traditional dovetail or a through dovetail, you end up with a butt joint like that, and you can't carry the bead all the way around. But by mitering it, that same bead now ends up being presented nice and neat because of that miter on the front edge. So, not hard, but it does require some very careful layout actually, some good tools. I'm going to go through each of those and we'll actually execute the joint so you can see it for yourself. Now, we've done lots of videos on dovetails, so I'll leave a link down below. What I want to do is introduce you to the few extra tools that I'm going to employ in this particular joint. This is the ones that you've already seen me use. I need some kind of a way of marking a 45 degree, so I'm going to use that 6-inch combination square. I need a razor knife, and I'm going to use my small crosscut saw. Other than that, all the rest of the tools are going to be the same. Now I'm going to clear the bench off, we'll get everything set up, and we'll just kind of film part of this since you've already seen the dovetails numerous times, but we'll make sure that we film the parts that are specific to this mitered edge dovetail. Now it doesn't matter how wide your stock is, I chose a couple of narrow pieces just so it didn't take so much to demonstrate. Remember, it's all about what's happening at the front. You want your stock to be properly milled, meaning before I start it's already been planed on the inside, the edges are square and straight, and the ends are also square, both square this way and square to the edge. Now I want these pieces, as I mentioned, to be the same thickness, so the easiest way to do that, or to set that measurement, is take your marking gauge, hold it on the end, let the cutter drop down, and then lock it. And then you know that represents this thickness. All right, so there's my tail board. This is going to be my pin board. So on the pin board, we just do as we normally would, which is we score a line on both the inside face and the outside face. On the tail board, we usually go all the way around, but in this case, we're only going to score the outside face, the back edge, and the inside face. We're not going to touch this front one. We're going to put the joint together like that. That's the first thing that's going to be done a little bit differently. Now we'll go through the layout. Now I've explained this in previous videos, but I'm just going to set my half pins, and then I'm only going to do 2 tails on this. Okay, now this is the front. So I'm going to take my dovetail marker. I'm using a 1:6 ratio. Put the pen in the hole. I find a red pen works best on wood like this. Now here's where we're going to do something just a little bit different. These back dovetails are going to be laid out the same, but instead of laying out from the front here, we're going to actually do the inside. We're going to treat this one very much like a half blind. Right? Now, mark the waist. It's kind of hard to see. and up here on the top. You want to identify where your waste is so that you don't end up making a mistake and cutting the wrong part. Okay, we've got our waste marked out. That's important. You don't want to be cutting on the wrong side. Now we've got to lay out our 45 up here. So I'll put that in the vise. And I'm going to draw on the piece of wood so you know exactly what I'm trying to do here. So what we've done, if I were to enlarge what the marking gauge has done, it leaves a mark that looks like this. So it's 90 degrees over here on the side you're keeping, and then the waste is the V. And I've got to run a knife line representing the 45 that has to be cut. And I've got to make sure that it goes right from this point, not down here, not out here. It's got to be right there. In order for this miter to close at the same time the joint closes, this has to be correct. So I'm going to use my magnifiers. I'm going to use a utility knife. And the problem with the utility knife is it has a V-shaped bevel, so we don't want to create a V on here. So I'm going to tip it forward a little bit so that we get a nice square line, or square cut on this side that we're keeping. We'll keep any angle in the waste side as well. So I'm going to set this, get down here and line it up exactly where I showed you. Hold that firmly, and I'm going to angle this a little bit, and I'm just going to start with several light passes and just get progressively deeper. Now, while I have it in the vise, I'm going to take my chisel and I'm going to just make a small cut on the waste side, and that'll provide me with that little knife wall to help start my crosscut saw when I come to do that. All right, the rest of it, or the next little bit, is going to be done like a normal dovetail. We'll pick up the camera again when we do something on this side. So these 3 cuts have been made the way you normally would on a dovetail, but now we're going to take the board and turn it around and cut from the inside. I'm going to raise it up. I want to make sure that that is standing plumb. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut like we would doing a half blind. We're going to saw from this point down to the gauge line. That's all we can do with this. Important that we make sure we keep that nice and square. That cut, that is. You don't want to go past this point, it'll show up on your miter. Okay, we've stopped down here at the gauge line and we're right there. So that's all we can do on this. Now we'll flip this around, put it back in the vise. Now I want to make sure that it's level. Now I'm going to grab my small crosscut saw just because I find it's easier to get really precise with it. And we want to go in here, laying up against that knife wall that we created. Watch how you're cutting because you don't want to go down below your cuts that you just made. Okay. Now we're ready to transfer this onto the tailboard. Pinboard, sorry. In other dovetail videos, you've seen me cut a little rabbet on the underside of the tailboard that helps to align the 2 pieces when you do the transfer. Can't do that here without messing up my miter, so what I'm going to do instead is use this masking tape. It's actually a heavier than normal masking tape. 4 layers of it will give me about 20 thousandths of an inch in thickness, and that's going to give me a nice little wall that will work in the same way that what we used to call the 140 trick does, only this one is removable and it doesn't interfere. Now I just need to go in there and trim those excess pieces off. My marking gauge is still set, so I can go in and use that to make the job complete. Take that piece off, and now I've got a sufficiently thick enough wall that that'll help register the two pieces. Okay, now I'm using my Sean shim for the offset, and I'm going to go with 24 thou, which is the thickness of the saw kerf. So I'll set that in here, and in this case I'm moving the tailboard over to my right, which means I'm going to use my dovetail marking knife. Since I moved the tailboard to my right, I'm going to go to the left side of each tail. And I'm showing you this just because we're going to do this end a little bit differently. Reach down in there and drag that through, and that will leave me a nice kerf on the pin board, which makes it really easy to cut the pins accurately. And we'll go to the left side of this one. Okay, now we're going to go 24 thou the other way, which means we're going to push this one to my left. So I've got the 24, register the bottom one, put that in position, slide it over, and make sure it's exactly where I want it. Now in this case, we're going to go to the right side of each tail, but we can't do this one, but I can do the second one. Now we've got to go in and mark this one. And what's going to be difficult here is we can't really get the dovetail marking knife up in there far enough, but I can use that long, narrow marking blade. So I'm going to get this back to being flush. And holding that in position, I'm going to reach way up in there, keep that tight to the side of the tail, and run that mark through. Okay, now set that aside. I'm going to run some gauge lines down the face. Identify your waist. Hey, if you like this video, we have more. Our newsletter has subscriber-only content, monthly discount on tools, and anything we bring out that's new, subscribers get first crack at it. Click on the link below. Let's get back to work. Marking might be a bit confusing. There's two X's on both sides, one on each side of the line. We're actually going to saw on this side of that line, but ultimately we're going to cut that 45, and this is going to be waist here and here. So I didn't want to leave you confused on this, but now what we've got to do is split that line, so we want to get as close to it as possible. If you're too close, it'll be loose. If you're too far away, it'll be too tight. So just get in there and do your best. Okay, prop this up so that it's sitting level, and we're going to do the same thing using our knife and our gauge. Okay, remember we're going to reference off of this inside. Get our square on there right. Want to be right on that point. Angle your knife so that it gives you a square cut on the side we're most concerned about. I find several light passes to be a lot easier to control than trying to do it with one heavy one. And we'll do the same thing here. Give ourselves a little knife wall to reference against. I'm going to switch this over just to make it a little easier to cut. Always like to have my board standing either level or plumb, whichever applies. Okay, now we'll go ahead and remove the waste like we normally would do. Chisel out the bottom. Okay, everything is cleaned out in here. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that this edge or that surface is square to here. So I'm going to have some real close inspection on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look and see, did my saw cut follow that gauge line? If it did, then everything should be fine. But I've got a little bit of material to remove right in the corner. Just come down and finish that. And that looks to be a pretty good cut, maybe just a little bit right there. No, that's all right. We'll do the same thing on this one. Now on this one, what we're doing is we're making sure that this surface here followed this gauge line. It looks like it might be just a little bit off. So I'll hold that up and I'll come in here and just ever so carefully get rid of that little bit of a Now I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to switch the angle again. I'm going to come in from this face. Just don't want to have any kind of a ridge that'll keep the joint from closing. Little piece right there. Okay, this one's ready. Now the last step, of course, is just to come in here and choke up on your chisel, chamfer the inside corners. Helps with the distribution of the glue and also helps get the joint together. No reason to test fit. As long as you've checked everything along the way, this should work. Not too much, but make sure you have all of the glue surface coated. And as I mentioned, I'm going to put some on that miter as well. Okay, now you want to start that by hand before you start pounding on it so that you know everything is properly lined up. And the part that always made me nervous was watching this gap at the base of the tails and the miter. And it always seemed like one was going to close before the other, but just prevent the splatter. Now check it for square, but based on how the miter's closed, I don't think we have a problem. So there's our, let's wipe this off. There's our miter, nice and tight. Our joint is seated at the bottom. Actually, I'm going to come in here and just see if I can't knock that down a little bit. I'm going to use a steel hammer and a block of wood. It doesn't hurt if you need or want to, is just to run a clamp across there. You see a little bit of squeeze out, you know you did the right thing. We'll give that a few minutes to set up, we'll plan it off and have a look. just clean that up. Okay, so there's your mitered edge through dovetail. Obviously, if you're going to put a bead or anything, you'd do that before you'd assemble it. But it'll give you a nice clean miter on the front edge. You can actually do it on the back if you want, not necessary if it's not going to be seen. Just wanted to make you aware of something that happened recently. If you're familiar with the back bevel on the plane blade, you have David Charlesworth to thank. We want to send our condolences out. David recently passed. He was certainly one of the greatest woodworkers of the last century. I think he brought a level of precision to the craft that nobody else had ever done before, and some of the things that he came up with, particularly the ruler trick, I would consider them revolutionary when it comes to hand tools. Our very best to his family. Sorry to hear of his passing. Thank you, David. If you like my work and enjoy my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos and help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the link below, the chisel and plane icon, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our online and in-person workshops.